Thank you so much for joining me.
Great pleasure.
What is the vision behind Doha debates?
The vision behind Doha debates is to bring some free speech to a region that doesn't have any, to bring some accountability and to allow a generation of young Arabs and Muslims to ask important questions of politicians, of thought leaders, of people who have responsibility for their lives and for what takes place in their lives. And there's no tradition of doing this for 1400 years. You go back to the time of the Prophet. It was a time when people debated, people of different faiths, people of different political persuasions debated. There was learning, there was study, there was inquiry, there was probing. All that has disappeared, particularly in the Arab world, in the last few decades. And what we tried to do was to ask our audiences to take a giant step backwards to that time of probing and questioning and debating. And we've been doing this now for 4.5 years, almost 5 years, and we've touched on very, very controversial issues. And I'm enormously proud of the way our audiences, young people from all across the Arab and the Muslim world, have come together to ask important questions, to interest themselves in important controversial issues. And I really think we've moved the bar for what's possible to say in the Middle East, what's possible to discuss in the Middle East as well.
And why do you think now? Why is the world interested in what the Muslims think now?
They're extraordinarily interested because in many ways the Western world, let's just deal with them for the moment, is all about stereotypes of the Muslim world. People have no idea of the amount of diversity in the 22 Arab states, for instance. They have no idea of the different range of opinions that we see on our debates. Well, I'll give you an example. When we first started the debates, you could tell how people were going to vote. And we have an electronic vote at the end of our debates. You could tell how people were going to vote according to the way they were dressed. If they were dressed Western, they might vote pro-Western. If they were dressed traditional Arab style, then they'd vote traditionally. Now, you have no idea. We have women who are wearing the niqab, their faces almost completely covered, who espouse very radical views. And what we found among our audience is that they are extraordinarily self-critical. For young Arabs, they're extraordinarily self-critical. I mean, we've had, bear in mind, there we are in Qatar, which is a conservative Wahhabi state in the Gulf. We have audiences voting that Muslims are failing to combat extremism. Now, that's extraordinary. That's extraordinary. They're self-critical to that degree. But I'm enormously encouraged about the way they have adopted the concept of debate, that they are prepared to discuss key issues affecting their lives and then shake hands and walk away. You know, the Middle East is a rough neighborhood. Traditionally, what happens? Winner takes all, loser dies. It's a zero-sum game. What debating shows is that it doesn't have to be that way. You can agree to disagree. You can shake hands and you can walk away. And that's what we did just now here in Washington, D.C., bringing one of our Doha debates here, which is why I'm sitting in the studio with you now.
A lot of the critics would be saying right now that if you talk about terrorism, there are lots of countries or cultures who've been involved with terrorism in the past. Why haven't we seen a Tim Sebastian debate in Sri Lanka or in Israel, for example?
Well, we may well see one in Israel. But when I was working for Hard Talk, a program on the BBC, which is a straight interview program, I was working on there for 7.5 years. We did issues in Sri Lanka. We did go to Israel many times. Look, this is a debating program. We have to have a home. It's an enormously complex thing to pick up our bed and walk to every country in the world. We'll get around as many as we can. I like to travel. We've had 2 debates in the UK. We've had now our first in the United States. We're going to be moving around the world. Yes, we will. Come back and criticize me in 10 years for doing that. Give me time. We're stacking up the air miles quite a bit already, and we're going to be doing more of it. I promise you that.
Okay, you mentioned Hard Talk. I remember a time when people were glued to the TV screens waiting for Tim Sebastian's Hard Talk to appear, where people would get a chance to watch how politicians could be grilled and ask the same questions that most probably were in the minds of the people.
Hopefully.
How's been your journey from Hard Talk to Doha debates?
Well, I did Hard Talk for 7.5 years, and it was an extraordinarily rewarding program. It was a great privilege to do because, as you say, the job was to ask questions on behalf of the people who couldn't do that. And I remember getting a letter once from a gentleman in the Arab world, and I got a number of letters. You get a lot of ones that are criticizing you. A lot of people criticize you for what you do. One or two of them actually seem to like what you do. And this was one of them. And the gentleman said to me, he said, "You interview a lot of hateful politicians," he said, "but you speak for the helpless and the hopeless." And it really stopped me in my tracks, because it's always useful in the media for people to remind you of who you're doing this for. This isn't some showbiz exercise. This isn't about egos. This isn't about me being able to get a better table in a restaurant when I go somewhere where you get recognized. It's about asking questions on behalf of the people who can't do it for themselves. And I make no apologies for bringing a large human rights bias to the interviews that I did on Hard Talk, because I think it was important to mention the names of people who had disappeared, to mention the names of people who had been tortured, to mention the names of people who'd had their rights infringed or violated and couldn't speak for themselves. And the privilege for me was to get those who were responsible sometimes for those infringements of human rights and civil liberties to answer those questions in the court of public opinion. It was probably the only court they would ever appear in. But to me, this process of accountability is central to what we were trying to do in these interviews. To me, a news interview is about cross-examination on the basis of facts. People can say, yes, you were a tough interview, you were hard, you never gave them room. It wasn't a process of trying to bash somebody. It was a process of trying to extract something as close to the truth as you could possibly get out of them. That was the important thing to me. Anybody can bash anybody, that's easy. And in any case, the audiences don't like it very much. Sympathies can shift very, very quickly to the interviewee. And you find yourself, the audience doesn't like what you're doing. You're going to get, in the normal course of events, you're going to get a lot of criticism anyway. But don't forget why you're doing this. And it's not for you, it's not for me, it's for them out there, because they can't do it for themselves. This is a very privileged position you have as an interviewer. You can sit on the fence and you can criticize everybody, and sooner or later somebody's going to bring you up short. And actually, I had a wonderful occasion once where somebody did bring me up short. I was interviewing a guy from the United Nations, and I was doing my usual thing about how the UN has failed here and there and everywhere. A man called Dennis McNamara, he was in charge of displaced people. Displaced through war, famine, disease, all through Africa. Millions of people displaced. And I did my criticism, and he said, wait a minute. In the course of the interview, he said, wait a minute. He said, I can't save millions of people, he said, but I have a small plane. And when I can, I fly that plane into a war zone, and I pick up as many women and children as I can. I put them on the back of the plane, and I fly the plane out, and I land them somewhere safe. And he looked across the interview table at me, and he said, so how many lives have you saved? And at that point, you put down your pen, and you put up your hands, and you say, good question. Good question. I always maintain the best question that was ever asked on Hard Talk was by a guy I was interviewing, not by me. And that was it. And that, you need those moments in life. You need a certain humility in TV. It's not a medium that's much known for humility, but you need it, because you're trying to reflect the world as it is. You're trying to talk to people who've done extraordinary things. You're trying to extract the truth on behalf of people who can't do it for themselves. That's a very long answer to your question, but you took me in different directions.